world is woken up to how powerful these new tools are. I'm most disappointed and concerned by, all the disinformation and the oversaturation of hype and fear, largely, right? And specifically in the void, a vision of where we want to take it, where we actually want it to help us arrive at, right? And so I would just say I really appreciate your movie and this being called the Humanity Code, because I think that's the level that we should be spending more time talking about is what do we want for the future of humanity?
Welcome to the Humanity Code Conversations. I'm Heidi Lawrenson, and today we'll explore another perspective on intentionally shaping the future with AI, where our technology amplifies our shared humanity rather than diminishes it. Today's guest, Rob Nail, is someone I'm thrilled to welcome, not just because he's a brilliant technologist and visionary leader with so much wisdom to share, but because I had the privilege of working alongside him at Singularity University and am delighted that more of you can benefit from his worldview today. Rob's an OG pioneer in leveraging exponential technologies like AI for positive global impact. As associate founder and longtime CEO of Singularity University, Rob helped build an institution dedicated to solving humanity's grand challenges by inspiring leaders to think bigger and act bolder. Now he's channeling his expertise into guiding other visionary leaders and organizations to unlock their full potential. He's a venture partner at Lionheart Ventures, managing director of Hammer FX, and advisor and coach at SRI's Innovation Center, to name a few of the things he's up to. Early in his career, Rob founded a robotics firm for cancer research and drug discovery that was acquired by Agilent Technologies. And he's served on several influential boards, including Harman International during its $8 billion acquisition by Samsung. With deep expertise in AI, modern leadership, and the future of work, not to mention the future of humanity, Rob is passionate about creating a world where purpose-driven innovation and conscious leadership go hand in hand. As you can see, Rob's work is deeply aligned with our mission at the Humanity Code. You're in for a treat as we explore being human in the age of AI. Thanks for being here, Rob.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Let's get started. Rob, I know you're humble, but you've had an incredible career. You are always living in the future and dealing with the best and the brightest and inspiring people to prepare for this moment that we're now living in. I mean, I remember 10 years ago, we were talking about the things that this moment in time. So with that context, just to kind of set the foundation, what's most exciting to you right now about this moment in this relationship that we now have with AI, now that generative AI is, in everybody's hands, and what concerns you the most? And I know you're not fear-led, but, what should we be watching out for?
I've definitely got some fear. Yeah. Let's see. You just sort of brought up a really funny story. When I got involved with Singularity, so it was started by Ray Kurzweil and Peter Diamandis. And the first program was in 2009. And I'd met Peter right after that and jumped on board, thought it was the most exciting vision and community of experts who were really leading towards a positive vision of where we could go through technology. And I remember I just stepped in and was wanting to help it grow. And I donated to the university, but then I started helping with some marketing and some sales. And in 2010, I remember going and talking to corporates. And I remember very particularly one specific time at Coca-Cola talking, maybe I should mention the name. That's fine. It's been a long time. 2010, talking to Coca-Cola about being a sponsor for Singularity University, getting involved with the vision of technology and where we can go. And they're like, we love this idea, but there is no way we can be associated with this crazy talk about AI and Ray Kurzweil. That's just total nonsense. And we're like, right? Maybe. And it says a lot to, say 5 years in, they end up sending lots of executives and others be like, okay, wait, this is directionally correct. And for me now, 15 years into that thesis, I'm still sort of in awe and a bit shocked by how correct many of those forecasts are. And I have to wonder, am I really leading my life in the belief that this is actually happening?
Right.
Because that curve doesn't stop today, right? That curve keeps accelerating and continues to take us someplace extraordinary, terrifying, not sure which, maybe both. And if I believe that, which I absolutely do, should I be doing things differently, right? And I think there's a yes and for me. What I'm most excited about is that the world is woken up to how powerful these new tools are.
Yeah.
I'm most disappointed and concerned by, gosh, all the disinformation and the oversaturation of hype and fear, largely, right? And specifically in the void, a vision of where we want to take it, where we actually want it to help us arrive at, right? And so I would just say I really appreciate your movie and this being called the Humanity Code, because I think that's the level that we should be spending more time talking about is what do we want for the future of humanity? And that's a fun, interesting, philosophical, but potentially more and more practical question, because we are going to race to some major changes. And if we don't have at least some direction as to where we want to head, bets are off as to where we arrive. And I'd say my concerns are the infrastructure, the systems, the incentives that are at work to drive innovation and to become the winner. I don't think those are necessarily aligned with what humanity ultimately wants or what would allow humanity to ultimately flourish.
Yeah, you bring up something that I think a lot about, and that is the fact that we actually have a complete lack of collective vision for what we want as a species, right? Companies sit down and they do their whiteboarding, and we personally take out our journals and map out a vision for our individual futures, but it's nearly impossible to do that collectively. But I feel at this moment in time is asking us, it requires us to have a clear vision, because we're going to have this partner, or whatever we want to call AI, who's going to just accelerate and amplify whatever it is, whatever direction we set it off in. And so how do we, go about in creating that vision? And, I know you've thought about it. I know you've had conversations with others. What do you think is going to help us get there?
So NASA sent this, we created this golden record to send on Voyager. I don't even know what year that was, a long time ago. And it was to be a message for anyone we meet out there, right? And they spent quite a bit of time thinking about, well, what message would best represent humanity? And they weren't really shying away from the worst of humanity. They obviously wanted to come with a positive message, but they spent time reflecting, like, who should best represent humanity? And I feel like that's a fun place to start. And it's something that I think we did a lot of work with at Singularity University, in that, with the original program, it was our 10-week graduate studies program, or the Global Solutions program. We specifically looked for and accepted students with as wide a diversity of humanity as possible, because the challenge was, how do we want people to come in, learn about these exponential technologies, but then apply them to solving, or at least attempting to solve, humanity's biggest problems, right? And whether it's food or water or energy and climate crisis, things like that. But this is not a Silicon Valley solution being thrown over to the foreign lands to solve all their problems, right? That's proven to be a really bad approach. And you and I, rich white Americans, are not the best representation of America either. So of humanity either. So like, how do we build somewhat an inclusive representation while also being not so diverse that that it's still effective, right? Because if you get just wildly disparate ideas, then nothing happens. You just like bicker and fight and nothing happens, right? And so we spent quite a bit of time trying to make sure that we assembled as diverse a perspective of humanity, of shared humanity as possible, socioeconomic diversity, religious diversity, gender. And it wasn't perfect, even remotely, right? But it was an attempt.
It was pretty good.
It was good. And it was definitely the most diverse sort of set of people. And everyone felt that way. You naturally felt that we were trying to operate at a slightly higher level. And I think there's something there, which is like, well, how do we make sure that we're representative? We're taking everyone's interest into account in some way. And I think that's ultimately a totally impossible problem to solve perfectly. But ironically, with AI tools, maybe you can actually integrate more of those perspectives than we've ever been able to before, using AI large language models to maybe survey, source, synthesize, and find some meeting of the minds there. And so I love the idea of using AI technologies as a member of a team, providing a different layer of accessibility, inclusion, and synthesis of those other perspectives. The UN is about as close as a representative body as we have, but there's a bunch of countries not part of the UN, right? They're just like, because they're bad actors somehow, but they're still part of humanity. And so maybe how do we include that into the mix? So
yeah, exactly. Another thing in, I think, creating the future with AI that we have to be really mindful of. I mean, I'm personally finding AI is causing me to reflect on, what it is that I want and who I am. And I think that collectively, it feels that we have to be super, super clear on who we are so that we can distinguish, what are the things about us that make us human that we want to make sure we're holding on to, that we don't kind of turn over to the machines. What are the things that we're doing that's like, yeah, good, pass that off to the machine. And are there even things that, we just have absolute superpowers and is even superior than the machine? Would love your thoughts on that. What makes us human?
What is uniquely human versus not?
Yep.
Well, I think this is the one that we're going to find out one way or the other. And I do think there is part of our ability to gracefully navigate this transition, I think is right in this space of clarifying what it is that we ultimately want to do as humans, or we feel like we're ultimately called to do as humans. And make sure that we get to do that. And the things that we maybe shouldn't be doing, and make sure that the technology does that. And today we've got all this historical baggage of what jobs are, right? So we've got an infrastructure and systems in place to make sure that 85 or 90% of the population is doing a job so that the whole system can work. And it's okay if 5% or 10% are unemployed, or whatever the actual number is, to let the system work. But the jobs in like corporations or everywhere else, many times are just tasks that are repetitive, are regurgitative. They don't actually need to leverage any innate, unique humanness. Creativity may be in the best space that we can look at. Actually, there's a few. So in this vein of looking at jobs, where the challenge at the moment is everyone is terrified that the AI is going to come in and take the job, right? We don't want to, and especially if you don't have clarity on what's next or where you can go, right? So there's so much pent up fear, and then there's systems in society that's sort of structured to keep you locked into that fear because there's not much mobility, right? And so I think there's a lot of things that we can do to provide everyone with some visibility into paths forward and supporting adaptability and mobility. And there's a lot of great work happening on that front, but I think we could do a ton more. However, I think the bigger opportunity is to lean into this question. So what is it that is uniquely human? And I think anything that you can imagine programming or teaching someone else to do is basically a robotic job, right? It's a job. So if I can teach a robot or an AI to do a thing, well, then that is probably better done, better suited for technology. Similarly, anytime the boss is driving for efficiency or productivity, those are robotic tasks, guaranteed. Like if you use those words, that is pointing directly to things that you want to basically turn the screws. And this is unfortunately where gig work is has sort of jumped into this space of creating more flexibility for us as individuals and using these platforms, but we're treating those individual gig workers more and more as efficiency tools, right? They're really just people are just end up being robots for those jobs. And our goal is to make them perfectly efficient as possible at that task. And unfortunately, humans are never going to get to the 100%. So it's better for technology to do that. So if we assume that all those tasks for efficiency and productivity go to the robots and go to AI, then that's what's left for us. And I don't have the full answer, but in that space, the frame that I've been using is shifting from jobs to the endeavors that we get to do, the 3 E's. They are in the first E is around empathy. So the things that I want to do with other humans in this bucket are I'm typically very long on nurses, but short on doctors. Like doctors, most of those analytical tools and referencing historical knowledge, AI is going to be way better. But the bedside manner, the understanding the human side, that is critical. And so the partnership with the AI and the nurse with empathy, I think that's the future. Like I think for the next 1,000 years, there's something there. Similarly, so that's around things around empathy, doing with other people. The second one is entertainment and innovation. So we always want to play. We want to be creative. We want to innovate and collaborate. I think all of those are sort of wrapped up in this entertainment and innovation bucket. And the third one is exploration. And this is obviously exploring the seas and exploring space, but also exploring the big questions. Why are we here? Right. What does it mean to be human? Is there a God? And are there multiple dimensions? I can see us for 1,000 years in our Star Trek future. These are the 3 things that we're going to be doing in the spaceship, right? We're gonna be playing together, playing games, making art, and trying to solve unsolved problems. And that sounds fun. And I'd love for us to do that and let technology solve the whole bottom of Maslow's triangle, right? Like all the wars and fight over resources and scarcity and food and water and shelter, we could solve all those. That's a big shift from where we are today, where the world and structures are in place to allow some people to have and others not to have. Yeah. Peter Diamandis likes to say the opportunity for this shift is from a world of haves and have-nots to a world of haves and super haves. There's still an inequity problem, and that leads to unhappiness and a whole bunch of other issues with that. But I like first this mindset shift to we don't need jobs to survive in that future because technology can do most of it. But there are still human elements that partnered with technology can be amazing for us. It would be very uplifting for me to spend all of my time focused on creativity or exploring certain problems and less of my time trying to pay the bills and survive. And I don't know a human that wouldn't say the same.
What do you think about kind of what I think of as the messy middle, right? You know, we are where we are today. There is this potential for a future where we are truly thriving because we're just constantly tapping into those things that make us human and that we we love to feel and we love to do. But there is this transition point you've mentioned a couple of times, the systems that are in place. What do you think is key to addressing that transition time?
I don't want to change unless I see something better, right? So at the moment, the only future I see with AI is, a zombie apocalypse Terminator scenario, because that's all I see from Hollywood, really. Although the wild robot is good.
Yeah,
Good
I saw
take.
the preview for that.
Yeah, I mean, so we're starting to think about it, but I think vision work, creating more visions of possible futures that are engaging and compelling, and that are credible, that we believe this future of abundance. If I ultimately deeply believe that a future of abundance is possible, well, that's going to change my fear level of navigating the change, right? If I believe that the future where there are no more schools is way better than the current one, because AI is working individually with all the students and everyone has access globally. If I believed that, well, I'd be excited about the transition. But right now, there are no vision. There's very few actual visions that are credible, that we feel like we want to race to. And I think that's part of the work that I'm trying to shift to, and I want to spend more time doing. And I just haven't really had the time or maybe the courage to really lean in this fully. But at Singularity, we still do a lot of work around sci-fi DI, science fiction design intelligence, where you bring experts and then creative writers together to do these futurescapes, so scenario planning in the future, and then architect and illustrate visions of those possible futures, right? We're not saying that's what's going to happen. We're just saying, hey, there's possibility, and here's the credible roadmap to get there. Now it inspires us to potentially think differently about, well, what do we do next? And I would even go one step, maybe this is 10 steps further, but I think if we can rally around some exciting visions of what's possible for the future of education, for health, for climate, you name it, that we believe in, then when we have an election, we can say, okay, whoever's running for election, which future are you trying to take us to 30 years from now, right? I don't really, your vision shouldn't last as long as this election cycle, right? Yeah, this term or getting the next term. It should be, what's the vision that you think is possible that all of your policy work is going to serve for us to arrive to, serve a higher purpose of what we're trying to build for all of us, for society, for humanity. And I'd love for elections to be talking about those kinds of things, like which vision of the future are you voting for? And that would be incredible. I can't wait for that.
Yeah, exactly. I know you've you've met with some politicians in your lifetime. Have you seen any that are like literally thinking that way?
Oh yeah. I mean, lots of them do. Yeah, here's another messy middle, right? There's messy middles all over the place, but another messy middle is sort of scale and corporate and government systems where, and let's talk about corporates first. In a lot of, and this is a lot of the work we do at SRI and others, many times the leader, the CEO or, the leadership team, they see the change coming. They believe in what's possible and the vision of what they can do. And maybe they're trying to drive it, but they've got investors and they've got the team and all of these other stakeholders that they have to account to. And then you have the young up and coming innovators, the sort of low level people that they're already the digital natives, which is already passé, but the people who also see it coming, right? They're like, hey, I want this future, that typically the youth, right? And then it's the middle layer in these corporations that are all the scaled system infrastructure, right? So all the sales and marketing systems and everything else that allow that company to to grow and scale now turns into actually a burden and a block for any new vision to come to form. And so it takes the top-down leadership to say, this is where we're going, and the bottom-up infiltration to be change agents and entrepreneurs. And then you have to convince that middle layer that that future is going to be better, even though the change is hard. And so right. I think it's first with aligning to vision and making that vision accessible. Like, what does it mean for me, and why do I connect with it? Well, how do I connect with it emotionally? Right? Because it's not just a statistical market research vision. This is an emotional story a future vision that I want to live into. And so it's not just the sort of intellectual data, it's also the emotional data. And I think with politicians, a lot of times the same is true. Some of them have very clear visions of what's possible, but nobody wants to hear it. All they want to hear about is like, what are you going to do with my problem today? And that, I think that responsibility is somewhat upon us as voters and constituents to say, hey, I want to hear your vision for what's possible, and let's talk at a higher level, which is, I don't know if that's possible, but where that work maybe does happen is around think tanks and other groups that many of the politicians subscribe to. But I'd love to see more of that being public and really viewed as a positive vision for the future, was viewed as a necessary element to my decisions. It would just be so much different.
Yeah, not daydreaming, but rather actually shaping the future in a really productive way. Shifting gears a little bit, I'd love to dig into a little bit more context around why the concerns that we all have right now are valid. Specifically, the short window of time that we have where we as humans can be particularly influential on AI and shaping it and being proactive and taking these visions and our values and all of that, and kind of letting AI know, hey, here this is what we expect of this partnership. Can you share little kind of 101 on why all this talk about AGI is so important, and even extending, I can't let you leave obviously with talking about what the singularity is and what that means, but what is it that we can do now, and what do those points in time of AGI, superintelligence, and singularity, what does that mean?
Well, I will just say, the work that we did with Singularity, and Ray Kurzweil, maybe he's a futurist or maybe he's a good forecaster. One of the things that Paul Saffo, one of our faculty at SU, he really taught me was that, we're not trying to be futurists with a magical ball that shows us the future. We're actually taking a more probabilistic approach to what's possible and how do we sort of nudge to the direction that we want to go, because the future is not determined. And so anything we could do to increase the probabilities of a positive future and decrease the probability of a negative future is probably in our best interest, right? Now, there's some fundamental beliefs around what AI can and cannot do, right? And I would say these are beliefs, right? They're like deep. They're not necessarily, we don't know.
Nobody really knows. Mm-hmm.
Nobody really knows. And so it turns into this sort of dogmatic fight, which is never useful, really. And so you got the accelerationists and the deaccelerationists, and you got these camps that are fighting when actually I think we should spend more time in kind of what you set up, which is like how do we want to guide and usher in these new technologies, regardless of the risk? Okay, great. So it's not proposing an existential risk. Great. So we've actually guided it to help us better, and there wasn't a risk. Fantastic. But if there is an existential risk, boy, I sure would hate to think that I didn't do anything about it, and I saw that risk being relevant. And so, I Well, I'll just throw out, Ray Kurzweil, he's got his forecast, and his new book, The Singularity is Near. And he's been consistent with his forecast 2030. And he's actually said, hey, maybe it's a little earlier. We're going to see AI that's effectively as intelligent as humans, though we don't really know what intelligence is. But the writing's sort of on the wall. You can already see that ChatGPT is a better writer than me in most fronts. Like, it can already take most tests already. And so many of the things that we thought were indicators of being human, man, the Turing test is no longer a thing. Like, we're coming up with new ways to categorize what that intelligence levels mean. And then I would just say, extend that out a little ways. So 2045, I believe, Ray's suggesting it's 1 billion-fold times more intelligent than humans, right? Just following that nice natural progression. And that curve has been accurate for a very long time, right? Basically tracking Moore's law and beyond. And there's no indication that's going to slow down. Yes, the large language models potentially are not going to continue to accelerate because they're so dependent on data sources, and we're going to use up all the energy that we have to run these models. But we know there's a ton of work and research going into other models, contextual models, real world awareness models, all these other things that when they're integrated in are going to probably get closer to how efficient our brains are. I'm certain that we're going to see a lot of that, keep the acceleration curve going for AI. And so I fundamentally believe, again, this is a belief based on just past performance is not necessarily predictive of the future, but sure, you can probably draw that line out in any model you want, and you see that it's going to take us somewhere profound. And so I think there is real need to spend more time talking about how to mitigate risks. This is something we spent quite a bit of time talking about at Singularity with every company, right? We want a company that is any problem you're trying to solve. When you start to solve it, you have a limited perspective on the problem. And then as you get further and further into the solution space, you have better awareness and understanding of the complexity and all the things tied to it. And you start to understand the problem in a deeper and deeper way. And then you may realize that your solution is taking us in the wrong direction and you have to evolve and pivot, right? And so I think the same, and that is the story of technology, right? We develop a solution to an existing problem. It presents a whole new horizon of other problems and opportunities. And then that we solve that problem, and that is just like a hamster wheel of progress that continues. And so we don't know what we don't know. And while I think stopping the progress of technology is just never going to happen, I just don't think there's any way to do it fundamentally. I do think that we can impose more thoughtfulness throughout the process. And in some cases, that means regulation from governments, right? The EU was the fastest in responding to a lot of the generative AI work.
The EU,
which is great. Yeah, the EU. And California is, fast trying to follow, but still it's so slow relative to the pace of the technology, right? And actually, this is one of the reasons I jumped on with Dave Langer and the Lionheart Ventures guys. This is a group of VC investors who spent quite a bit of time building a thesis about the risks of AI and developing it, and how to thoughtfully invest in technologies that will help us progress in innovation, but also will mitigate those risks overall. And so I think there are very thoughtful ways to do that. There's things we should clearly avoid. There's things that we could, clearly do to help create guardrails. And we should just be doing those. And everyone should just be aligned that governments, corporates, academia, we should all come together, hold hands. Is this an Asilomar, like which there has been several Asilomar AI conferences? That's probably the right approach, right? It's a messy, complex problem. Yeah, cross-discipline. And But that's the only way humanity knows how to work together, right? Because there's so many perspectives. So we have to use tools like that to collaborate. And my biggest fear at the moment is everything is so politicized. There's so much misinformation and so much hype and hoopla through social media, and doesn't create a safe space to have that dialogue. And so those conversations probably have to be off the record, offline, and then the results and everything else have to be brought to bear. But I do think that we should expect investors to be more thoughtful about what they're investing in. I do think we should ask our entrepreneurs to imagine in wild success, if you are completely successful at scale, what could go wrong? Just as an exercise, right? Just if Facebook 10 years ago would have said, oh, we're going to be in 2 billion or 8 billion hands, and we're pumping you with advertisements from anybody, and they're targeted on elections, what could go wrong, right? And we had Cambridge Analytica in 2016 and so many other things that we're not even able to track anymore because it's just like infiltrating, right? And so I think entrepreneurs, corporate leaders have responsibility to a higher purpose than profit of the corporation, right? I think we have to figure out how to shift our system to be about the health and welfare of society and humanity, not just the corporate profit. And, capitalism has been the most innovative tool of progress that humans have ever created, right? That's like the ultimate invention is the capitalist system. And yet we've let it expand into things where now the incentives are actually misaligned with what we want, right? People are now able to just fully, right. And so now they're able to just fully game that system and win to the detriment of the environment or to the detriment of our health and obesity and so many other things, right? And so there's just I think it's a moment to rethink the system, the container of which we want to operate, but it needs to be in the context of, well, what do we really want? Like, where do we really want to go? Because if our belief is we just want to have total freedom and independent individuality, well, that'll take us one direction, right? If we think we should totally lock down and control the outcomes completely, that takes us in another direction. And then I think there's some nuance there that we can argue about in some forum and pick a better path in between those.
Going back to the investment, the work that you're doing yourself, as well as with Lionheart Ventures and others, and even your consulting work, are there any specific projects or initiatives that are particularly exciting to you and or give you hope that we're going to head in the right direction?
Yeah, I've got a slide somewhere that has the 300 startups that have been funded that are utilizing AI technology specifically to target climate-related problems. I mean, that's like a narrow lane of big problem space. Like the hurricanes, the devastation there.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of money getting funneled into startups that are particularly targeting these really difficult problems. And that's capitalism at its best, I believe, right? And then there's a whole ton of money going into just random stuff that's, I feel like, a waste and just problematic. So I'll just be general about it. There's a lot of really interesting work. I'm sure everybody's used ChatGPT and the idea of creating an agent, right? My own GPT that is sort of a persona, right? So you can design these personas that then are like an expert in a space that then can serve you on a specific problem, right? And I love that concept. Like I think there's nothing more powerful than me having a team of people aligned with my interests and my desires and my hopes for the future, and they're going out into the world and finding the things that are aligned. At SRI, there's a little project where in the education group we're targeting the YouTube space. I don't know how much time you spend on YouTube, but I every day tell my kids to get off of it because they follow some TikTok trend.
Yeah.
They just like go nowhere, right? Or to some really weird places that's just icky. What if I sent my AI agent in, and it knew I'm trying to learn how to play piano, and I'm trying to learn how to learn Japanese, and I'm trying to do woodworking, and these are things that I'm passionate about, and I'm also exploring consciousness and what it means to be human. What if it just served up that playlist and was constantly helping nudge me in a growth and positive health direction? Like, what would that look like? What does YouTube look like now if I have agents bringing me things to help me be a better Rob, to be a better human?
The algorithm fighter agents.
Right. It's like a directed algorithm now that actually is aligned to my best interests. And so there's a couple companies looking at that space that I think that's the promise of AI. I think that's the exciting piece, that when we start to turn these things on to serve our best interests, and maybe could say, hey, Rob, I know you see all these like health videos, but actually turns out they're the wrong direction for you, right? Because of your genetics or because of the fake news or whatever it is. And so having people that are serving my interests, I think is interesting. And obviously it can go sideways, right? If I decide I'm a greedy bastard and I want to like take from everybody and it's going to serve me to that purpose, man, it's going to harm a lot of other people. So that's the downside that we have to figure out how to navigate and potentially protect against. And I don't know what the answer is to that, right? Because that's a tricky one.
Yeah. I mean, all the more reason that this conversation needs to be about humans and not the technology. I do think a part of the answer, but it's no quick fix, is the inner work, right? If everyone on the planet were doing a lot of that inner work, we might be in a much better place. Speaking of that, I've got so much more I want to ask you, but we're running tight on time. But you're doing quite a bit of coaching now, and I know you're involved in coaching organizations. What are you seeing any kind of common themes that people are challenged by? And particularly, is there anything different than maybe a decade ago?
Yeah. I think everyone feels it. Most people are talking about it, which is, what is my higher calling? What is my higher purpose? How do I align to what's most important? And the pandemic really, I think, forced this upon everyone. It's like, what is essential work? What does it really mean to be a full integrated human, right? And earlier we talked a little bit about, I think one of the coolest things that the pandemic brought was the ubiquitous use of Zoom and FaceTime and other things, where now in business settings, you find out that I've got kids and toys and dogs and all these other things in my life. And that actually makes me more human, right? And so now we're meeting as humans, not as robots trying to solve a problem, right? And I'm very excited about where that can go. And I feel like that's where a lot of the anxiety with people that I talk to, where that comes from. It's like, am I really doing what's most important, like as a human, as me? Or am I just like working a corporate job because that's what pays the bills? And that tension and anxiety, I think most people, once you get to a certain level, right? There's so many people who are just trying to survive. And that's a whole other, that's a totally other problem. But with, for a lot of people in sort of being coached, this question about how do I operate as a more integrated person? How do I be a better human and do better business and make more impact in the world? And how do I make sure that my family health, my friends' social health, make sure that those are just as important to me as my business performance health, right? And I think that's a fun. It's complicated and it's hard, but it's way more authentic and real, right? And it unfortunately it invites or fortunately invites a lot of vulnerability, because it's like, I'm a master in this leadership side for a business and I can do finance models all day, but man, I can't I can't hold a friendship at all, right? And so you can be a virtuoso in one part of your life and have a huge void in another, and you don't feel really full, right? You don't feel fully healthy. And so I think a more holistic approach to being a leader, being a human is important. And again, back to where we started, I think that's going to be the only question that we have going forward, which is like, how, as more and more of the robot tasks that we do, we give over to technology. Oh man, I get to spend more time exploring questions that I'm excited about, being creative and interacting with humans in a deep, present way.
Yeah. One of the questions that I always ask is to consider the question of how can viewers be the prompt? Be the prompt is a phrase that we use at the Humanity Code to think about what we can do now to actually shape the trajectory of AI. So first of all, if there's anything else that you really wanted to share that we haven't had a chance to cover, please feel free to do that. But then in closing, I just would love to hear how can viewers, in your opinion, what do you think is the most important ways that they can be the prompt and shape a future with AI that we actually want to live in?
I'll just say the one thing that I'm thinking about the most, and I think can be a big part of raising hopes for the future, is back to vision, right? I think everyone can take more time actually, and this is a difficult exercise, but sitting down and thinking, what is the best I can imagine? And not like what I read and saw in the movies or things, but like what is the best possible education for my kids that I can imagine? What's the best physical health I can imagine for myself? What's the best social network I can imagine being possible for myself? What's the best financial situation I could imagine for myself? And exercising this tool of imagination and vision for what we want, start personal, like start with like, what do I think is the best possible future for me? And it's such, and I'll tell you, I've done this a bunch of times, and I still, every time I look at them, I was like, is that really the best I can imagine? Yeah, that's so terrible, right?
Yeah. Our brains are so linear and small.
Yeah. I have a friend and coach, Heath Diekert, and he was the one that brought this to me. He's like, Rob, so what's the best possible financial situation you could imagine for yourself in 10 years? And I was like, I've got $100 million. And he's like, is that really the best you can imagine? I was like, oh man, wait a minute. That's a hard problem, right? Because it's not just the money. It's like all the other things that come with it and this stuff. And so when you meditate on what is the best possible future I can imagine, it challenges you in ways that we don't spend any time thinking about, right? And so then, okay, do it for yourself. And now let's apply it to democracy. Like, what's the best possible version of democracy or governance that we could imagine? Who's doing that work right now? Like, where is that coming from, right? And is it holistic enough to incorporate the context of the future that we see coming, right? Because we know AI is going to get super smart. So how do we leverage that? And so I think the vision process, imagining what is the best future you can imagine. Oh gosh, it's just loaded.
Well, thank you so much, Rob, for the time today. It's really a privilege to know you, and I'm grateful for the work that you do, both the inner work and the external work that you do. You're making a huge difference, and I know you've probably opened some minds and hearts today. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me, and I will just say kudos and thank you for really being courageous to launch this project and to really lean into it and to open up to wherever it takes you. Because I think this is exactly what the world needs more of, more conversations about where we're headed, what's possible, what might happen, good and bad, and like, what do we do about it? Like, how do we really come together to navigate the future? So thank you for doing that work, and I'll be rooting for you and the Humanity Code.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you for joining us on the Humanity Code Conversations. Remember, our future with AI is being written now and by us. Let's ensure it's a story that honors and elevates our shared humanity.